A retired black veteran takes his daughter on a quiet trip through a crowded U.S. airport until his old K-9 partner Shadow detects something strange a man nearby is carrying a hidden recording device. That man looks hauntingly familiar. As layers of betrayal, guilt, and old missions unravel, the past crashes into the present with Maya caught in the middle. What begins as a family trip becomes a tense fight for truth, redemption, and protection. If real emotions and true-to-life suspense resonate with you, don't forget to like and subscribe. This is a story you won't want to miss. The terminal of San Diego International buzzed with the low hum of travelers dragging their carry-ons announcements echoing across the hall, and children tugging at tired parents. James sat quietly in a molded plastic chair near Gate 32, sunglasses tucked into his collar and hands resting on his daughter Maya's backpack. At 10, Maya was still small enough to curl against his side without causing a scene, but old enough to ask the kind of questions that made even a seasoned combat veteran pause before answering. "Why do people always look so serious in airports?" she'd whispered earlier, her breath warm against his arm. He hadn't answered some questions, didn't have quick replies. Beside James sat Shadow, his retired K-9 partner, now 7 years old and still alert. His coat was mostly black with streaks of gray down the snout, and though he'd lost a step or two in speed, the sharpness in his amber eyes never dulled. For most of the past hour, Shadow had been resting head between his paws, ignoring the chaos around them with the practiced indifference of a veteran. But now he wasn't. The change was subtle at first. Shadow lifted his head ears, twitching nose flaring once, twice. Then he rose to a sitting position. James noticed it immediately. "You good boy?" he asked in a low voice, brushing a hand across the thick fur at the dog's neck. Shadow didn't respond. Instead, he stared fixedly across the terminal. A moment later, he stood. Maya blinked, looking up. "What's wrong with Shadow James?" followed the dog's gaze. 20 feet away, near the edge of the boarding queue, stood a man mid-40s, maybe older Caucasian, baseball cap low over dark blonde hair, aviator sunglasses despite being indoors. He wore a light windbreaker over jeans, and one hand was tucked deep into the jacket's right pocket. James narrowed his eyes. Shadow gave a sudden sharp bark, loud, heads turned. "Sir, please, control your dog," a TSA agent barked from nearby. James didn't move. Shadow took a step forward, body rigid, another bark louder, this time more guttural. The man turned his head slowly towards them. For a moment, something unreadable flickered across his face. Not confusion, not surprise. Something between familiarity and unease. Then, as if on cue, he smiled and gave a small nod, raising his left hand in mock greeting. James rose slowly to his feet, placing a calming hand on Shadow's collar. Maya clutched the strap of her pink duffel bag, eyes wide now. "Dad." "It's okay," he said quietly. But it wasn't. Not quite, because the man hadn't flinched at the barking. He hadn't acted startled or annoyed or even cautious. He'd responded like someone used to disruption, and worse, someone used to dogs like Shadow. James turned his body slightly, placing himself subtly between Maya and the man. His hand hovered near the side pocket of his cargo jacket, where an old reflex still kept a compact flashlight and now useless a badge from a career he didn't speak of. He watched the man stroll casually toward the far vending machine bank. Still, with one hand deep in that windbreaker pocket. Still, not sweating. James noted it 76 degrees outside, 72 inside, and not a bead of moisture on that man's brow. He was trained too. Shadow's head snapped to follow the motion. His hackles didn't rise, he wasn't afraid, but he wasn't calm either. James leaned down slightly. "Stay," he whispered. Shadow didn't move, but his breathing had changed faster, tighter. Almost imperceptibly, he shifted his weight onto his front paws. James turned back to Maya and smiled. "Why don't we grab something to drink, huh? Plane's not boarding yet." She nodded quickly, clearly unnerved. "Is Shadow mad? No, baby. He's just remembering." They walked to the small cafe on the concourse. James kept an eye on the reflection in the glass cooler door as he opened it, watching the man in the windbreaker reappear briefly, this time chatting with a janitor. Shadow stood by the corner, still focused. Something was off, but not urgent yet. James pulled out a juice for Maya and a bottle of water for himself. As they returned to the seats, Shadow had calmed, though he still stood guard rather than sitting. Maya was sipping from her straw when she said, "He was looking at me." James paused. Who the man with the blue hat? He smiled, but not like a nice smile. Shadow's ears flicked. James didn't correct her. Instead, he said, "Well, good thing you've got the best dog in the world." "Right?" She beamed. "Yeah." James kept watching the man now walking toward a charging station, one hand still in that damn pocket. Something flickered in his mind. A distant memory, a face blurred by time and tinted glass, a briefing room in Kabul, a whisper of betrayal. He blinked it away. Shadow's stance hadn't changed, and that told him enough. Something was coming. He just didn't know what. Not yet. James tried to shake the feeling as he sipped from his water bottle, letting the cool liquid settle his nerves. He'd spent enough time in active duty to know the difference between coincidence and something meant to look like it. There were plenty of people in the world with baseball caps and aviators, but the shape of that man's jawline, the way his shoulders tilted slightly to the left when he walked, too familiar. His pulse ticked up. He hadn't thought about Eric Decker in over a decade, not since the inquiry, not since the mission that went wrong, not since his name showed up in a heavily redacted report with the phrase "classified compromise probable" stamped across the top. James told himself he was being paranoid. Retirement hadn't erased the old instincts, but sometimes they kicked in where they weren't needed. Still, he couldn't ignore Shadow's reaction. That dog didn't bark without cause. Eric. He hadn't heard that name aloud in so long it felt foreign, but it came back now with perfect clarity. Eric had been the tech officer in their unit, smart restless, and just cocky enough to be dangerous. James remembered long nights in briefing tents, the glow of monitors lighting up Eric's face, and the way he'd always pushed too close to the edge of protocol. When the breach happened, codes leaked coordinates. Exposed, 3 men died in a location they shouldn't have been. Someone had traced the signal back to a secure terminal Eric had last accessed. Internal affairs intervened fast. No one talked, but everyone knew. Then Eric disappeared from service and the country. Case closed. James never saw him again. Until maybe now. He watched the man walk away from the charging station and move casually toward the restroom corridor. James stood gesturing to Maya. "Stay with Shadow for a minute, okay?" She nodded, curling up with her juice box and flipping through the game app on her tablet. Shadow didn't budge, but his eyes tracked James immediately. James gave him a subtle hand signal guard. The dog sat straighter, his breathing measured. James moved through the crowd, slow and deliberate, blending in like muscle memory demanded. He didn't head toward the restroom directly, but took a loop around the gift shop beside it, grabbing a bag of trail mix he didn't want, and then stepping outside just in time to see the man exit the corridor. Their eyes met again. This time, James didn't look away. The other man froze not dramatically just for half a second, but enough for James to see it recognition. And then he smiled. The same tilted grin Eric always had when he knew something you didn't. He turned and walked briskly toward his gate. James followed for a few steps before stopping himself. He had Maya. He wasn't chasing ghosts. Back at their seat, Maya looked up. Dad Shadow's acting weird again. James turned. The dog had moved just slightly, but enough to close the gap between him and a nearby luggage cart. His nose hovered near a black backpack resting against the base of the metal rack. The cart was unattended. James's gut clenched. He stepped beside Shadow and gave a low command check. The shepherd's ears twitched. Slowly, precisely, he sniffed the perimeter of the bag, then stopped. He sat and gave a single deep growl. James didn't hesitate. He flagged a nearby TSA agent, a young man barely out of high school. "This bag needs to be checked," he said flatly, authority still sharp in his voice. "My dog's trained for detection." The agent hesitated. "Sir, unless it's yours, it's not. That's why you're checking it." Shadow growled again, shorter this time. The agent stepped back and radioed for his supervisor. Minutes passed. A more seasoned officer arrived, and James explained showing his ID retired military K-9 handler certification still valid. He's never false alerted in his life. The officer nodded once and took the backpack, carrying it behind a divider near the janitor's closet. James kept his body between Maya and the scene, one eye on the dog, the other on the people moving past. Too many variables. His daughter was humming quietly now, unaware of the silent battle building beneath their feet. When the officer returned, his face was pale. "We found a small audio recording device, wired into the lining." James's jaw tightened. Live or passive, hard to tell. It's not commercial. That figured. Someone watching security response time, James asked. Could be. He didn't say it, but they both knew what it meant, testing the system. Gauging how fast someone noticed a bag. Measuring the time it took for TSA to respond to a low-level alert. Preparing for something bigger, or it could be surveillance tracking a specific conversation or person. James looked toward the direction Eric had gone. His mind raced through possibilities. This wasn't some accident. Shadow nudged James's hand, eyes alert. The dog was tracking a scent. James nodded and released him with a soft find. The shepherd moved instantly, trailing around the base of the waiting area, weaving past bags and travelers with uncanny focus. Then he stopped at a nearby trash bin, sniffed, and let out a short, frustrated bark. James approached. Inside the bin, nearly buried under a stack of crumpled napkins and a newspaper, was a folded airport map. Printed on the back was a hastily scribbled line that connected Gate 32 to an elevator at the far end of the terminal. And written in small, nearly invisible pencil, "Asset trace begins here." James stared at the words. "What the hell are you doing, Eric?" He tucked the paper inside his jacket, just as the overhead speaker crackled with the boarding call for a flight not theirs. The noise didn't matter. His thoughts were elsewhere now, back in dusty tents and encrypted laptops, and accusations that never went to court, and promises made silently at funerals. He turned back to Maya, who was now playing tic-tac-toe on her tablet, oblivious to the manhunt happening feet from her. Shadow returned to her side, lying down, but still watching. James sat beside them again. He glanced at the map inside his jacket, then toward the corridor. Something told him this wasn't over, not even close. James kept his posture relaxed, but his mind was racing silently, reviewing every movement of the man he now believed knew was Eric Decker. The hastily scribbled note retrieved from the trash still pressed against the inside pocket of his jacket, warm with the heat of his chest. "Asset trace begins here." That phrase echoed in his thoughts as he glanced at Maya, who remained blissfully distracted. She was humming now, tapping at her tablet, swinging her legs under the airport chair. It was almost cruel how children trusted the world to stay intact, unaware of the cracks running beneath their feet. James knew better. The problem wasn't what he saw, it was what he couldn't. Eric was smart, too smart to leave a clear trail. This wasn't improvisation. It was a strategy, a slow tightening of some larger plan. James shifted slightly in his seat, scanned the area again, then dropped his voice low. "Sweetheart," he said, "come sit closer to me." Maya looked up surprised, but not suspicious, and moved next to him without protest. Shadow repositioned instantly, closing the triangle between them. James exhaled and brushed a strand of hair from her face. That's when he noticed the earrings. Tiny silver stars. She'd worn them before, but something about them now drew his attention. He stared, then asked gently, "When did you start wearing those again?" Maya grinned and touched one. "These, Mom gave them to me. Remember, the ones with the tiny GPS things in them?" Her voice dropped to a whisper like it was a secret. "She said if I ever got lost, they'd help find me." She giggled. "Pretty cool, right?" James smiled automatically, but his insides coiled tight. GPS earrings. He remembered the argument with her mother. He'd thought it was excessive, even invasive, but she'd insisted peace of mind, she said. In a split second, that decision no longer felt like a domestic disagreement. It felt like a potential vulnerability, or worse, a backdoor. James leaned closer, studying the earrings more carefully. They were standard kid safety wear, not military grade, but Eric didn't need much. If he'd intercepted the original signal or cloned the frequency, he could track her without them ever knowing. James shifted again and glanced at Shadow, who had begun to stare at Maya, not her face, but her ears. His head tilted slightly, a behavior James recognized instantly. The dog was detecting something. Not scent. Frequency, Shadow James murmured. The shepherd's ears twitched, his stare fixed now on Maya's right earring. He stepped forward once cautiously and gave a small, anxious huff. Maya blinked. "Is he mad at my earrings?" she asked, half laughing. "No," James said, standing slowly. "He's just trying to tell us something." He knelt and examined the earring without touching it. A faint metallic glint revealed a seam too precise for ordinary jewelry. His mind raced. "Baby," he said softly, "do you remember where Mom got these?" Maya frowned. She said from a friend. "A woman who works in something. I don't know. She said it was safer than putting stuff in my backpack." James nodded slowly. "Did she say what kind of friend?" Maya shook her head. "No, just that she knew about kids getting lost and stuff." James stood again, trying not to let her see the weight in his eyes. If Eric had compromised those earrings, then he wasn't just watching. He was close. James scanned the terminal once more, feeling Shadow move beside him, tense and alert again. Then he saw him. Eric was standing near a coffee kiosk, pretending to look at the menu. He wore a navy jacket, now hat, removed different sunglasses. He blended in perfectly, but James caught the unmistakable posture of someone observing rather than ordering. His gaze wasn't on the menu, it was on Maya. Shadow let out a low growl that barely carried. James reached for the leash without taking his eyes off Eric. "Let's walk," he said to Maya, "to stretch a little before the plane." She nodded happily, slipping her hand into his. James didn't look back, but he knew Eric was following. They moved past the bookstore, past a row of tired passengers napping against their luggage, and stopped near a bank of windows that overlooked the tarmac. James positioned Maya between him and the glass and scanned the reflection. Eric followed at a measured pace, never looking directly at them, but maintaining a distance close enough for easy tracking. He was good, still calculated, still dangerous. James bent down and whispered to Shadow, giving a signal flank. The dog moved subtly to the edge of their position, closer to where Eric would have to pass if he approached from the left. Shadow's focus didn't waver. James checked his watch. 25 minutes to boarding. He had time to think, but not much. Eric approached slowly, now sipping from a paper cup he likely hadn't ordered. He passed within 10 feet, glanced toward the window, and then faked a startled look as if recognizing James for the first time. "Well, I'll be damned," Eric said, grinning, voice loud enough to carry but not alarm. "James Holloway, as I live and breathe." James turned tight-lipped. Eric, small world. Eric continued, taking a casual step closer. "Didn't expect to see you here." James kept his tone measured. "Yeah, I imagine you didn't." Eric's gaze shifted to Maya. "And this must be your little girl." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Maya stepped back slightly, her hand gripping James's wrist. Shadow inched forward almost imperceptibly. Eric leaned just a bit closer. "She's a beauty. You should be proud." "I am," James said, voice low. "You traveling somewhere, Eric?" Eric shrugged. "Same gait as yours, apparently. Coincidence, right?" James didn't answer. Eric glanced at Shadow, who stared back unmoving. Then Eric looked at the earrings. "Smart move," he said softly, "though maybe not smart enough." James felt the shift in temperature inside his chest, not fear, but calculation. He was still 2 steps behind, but the gap was closing. He could feel it. And so could Shadow, who now moved slightly forward again, nose flaring once more as if catching something new just under the surface. James turned slightly to Maya. "Sweetheart, why don't you go sit in that seat right there?" He pointed just a few feet away, close, but away from the direct line between the men. She obeyed instantly, sensing the subtle change in tone. Eric tilted his head, eyes cold despite the casual grin. "Relax, man. I'm not here to start anything." "No," James said quietly. "You're here to finish something." Eric didn't reply. Instead, he tapped the side of his coffee cup and looked out the window. Shadow barked once, sharp and fast. James didn't move. Neither did Eric, not yet. James watched Eric carefully, noting how his former comrade stood just a bit too close to the glass, sipping slowly from his coffee cup as if he had all the time in the world. The man hadn't aged much, still trim, still calculating. But what struck James most wasn't the familiarity of his face. It was the precision in his movements, the way he never let his right hand drift too far from his jacket pocket, and how his eyes flicked to Maya every 30 seconds, even when he pretended not to look. James gave a subtle head nod to Shadow, who stayed positioned near Maya, unblinking. "You flying out too?" James asked, voice level, tone casual. Eric smiled, tapping the side of his paper cup. "Yeah, same flight apparently. Crazy." James didn't return the smile. "Let me see your boarding pass." The grin on Eric's face twitched barely, but he obliged, reaching into his back pocket and pulling out the printed slip. He handed it over with a relaxed hand, but James noticed the faint delay. James held the pass up to the light. At first glance, it looked legitimate, seat 14. A same flight number departure time matched, but there was something off. The ink wasn't uniform, and the alignment of the QR code was slightly askew. It looked like a high-res scan printed onto standard stock. No security emboss, no airline watermark, no microprint. It wasn't real. James didn't let his expression change. He handed it back slowly. "You're flying light," he said, nodding at Eric's lack of carry-on. "Just needed a change of scenery," Eric replied. "You know how it is." James did. He also knew that Eric had no business boarding a commercial plane with a fake pass unless he didn't plan to reach the destination, or unless someone on the inside was helping. James's stomach tightened. He needed to get Maya away from here. "We should head toward the gate," he said aloud, gently touching his daughter's shoulder. "They'll start boarding soon." Maya looked up and nodded, sliding her tablet into her backpack. Shadow followed them without command. Eric lingered a moment, then began walking in the same direction, deliberately keeping 3 steps behind. As they reached the TSA checkpoint, James glanced to his right and spotted a familiar face, dark uniform, lean build, close-cropped hair. Leo Ramirez. Years ago, Leo had been a green recruit, fresh out of the Marines, when James helped run K-9 integration for airport security drills. They hadn't seen each other since. Leo looked up from his scanner and his eyes widened slightly in recognition. "No way," he muttered, stepping forward. James Holloway James gave a tight smile and shook his hand. "Hey, Ramirez. Didn't know you were still working this post." "Yeah, transferred back 2 years ago." Leo leaned in slightly, voice lowered. "You flying out?" James nodded. "Yeah, San Diego to Chicago." "You look tense, man," Leo said under his breath. Something off, James glanced back toward the line. Eric was pretending to scroll through his phone. "You see that guy in the blue jacket?" Leo glanced discreetly. "Yeah, fake boarding pass. Good printer job, but not airline issued." Leo's jaw twitched. "You sure positive? No watermark, no serial ink?" Leo nodded once, then stepped slightly closer and lowered his voice. "Not gonna ask details, but just so you know, we've had weird chatter all week. Surveillance glitches. Someone hacked our CCTV for Terminal B 2 nights ago, looped footage for 47 minutes. Might be nothing. Might not." James's stomach dropped a little more. "What's security doing about it?" "We've got backup running isolated servers, but nobody's owning up. Most think it's just error, but one of our plainclothes guys spotted a man loitering in baggage claim for over an hour yesterday, fit your guy's build." James breathed out slowly. "Can you fast-track us through?" Leo nodded. "Absolutely. Come on." He walked them past the regular line, waved through another agent at secondary screening, and guided them to the priority scanner. Maya looked up confused. "Is something wrong?" James knelt beside her. "No, sweetie. We just got lucky knowing the right people." Maya smiled faintly. Like in your army stories, James smiled back. Something like that. As they moved through the security arch, Shadow paused just before the scanner and gave a soft growl, ears pinning back momentarily. Leo noticed. Your dog's still alerting. Yeah, he's picking up something. Anything on your girl? Not her. I think it's still frequency-based, could be in the earrings. I'll check them again on the plane. Leo nodded. I'll log the incident on my end, but off the record. Appreciate it. As Maya stepped through, James followed, keeping an eye on the line. Eric was moving up slowly, still keeping his eyes low, avoiding attention. Leo leaned in one more time. Careful, Holloway. You're being watched. I don't think he's working alone. James didn't respond. He didn't need to. He could feel it now, like heat off the concrete. They were no longer operating in neutral space. Every second past this point would cost something. The gate came into view as a digital voice overhead announced a delay in boarding due to an equipment malfunction. 15 minutes. Maybe 20. James adjusted Maya's bag over his shoulder, kept Shadow close to his side, and moved them toward the edge of the boarding area. He scanned the crowd, watching Eric move through security with surprising ease. James turned to Leo, still within earshot. You see that Leo's eyes narrowed. Somebody cleared him. Internal has to be, I didn't flag his pass yet. Then someone else overrode the system before we got here, which means... James nodded. He's not just following, he's being helped. Leo's jaw tightened. You want me to pull him now? James shook his head. No. If you make a move without cause, and he has cover, he walks, and we lose our chance to know why he's here. So, what's the play? James looked at Maya, then back to Leo. I stay in the open. Let him think he's in control. For now. Shadow made a low noise, ears still tuned to something no one else could hear. James watched Eric step just inside the boarding zone cup, now empty eyes once again flicking toward Maya as if drawn by gravity. James stood still, eyes locked on Eric's position as the man loitered just inside the boarding zone, pretending to check flight updates on his phone while subtly scanning the crowd. Maya sat on a bench nearby, munching crackers and swinging her legs as Shadow remained by her feet, unusually stiff. James had been watching Shadow long enough to know when something wasn't right, not just alertness, but the kind of tension that came from conflicting senses. The shepherd's ears rotated slowly, not locked on one direction, but shifting, flicking at different angles, as if triangulating something he couldn't fully isolate. James knelt beside Maya and reached for her backpack, pulling out a small collapsible bowl and a water bottle. Let's give Shadow a drink, he said, unscrewing the cap with a casual ease while his mind ran tactical loops. Shadow didn't approach the bowl. Instead, his nose flared hardtail, stiff eyes fixed on a nearby metal luggage rack positioned against the wall across from the boarding counter. James followed the gaze. There, nestled among two ordinary roller bags, was a third suitcase, black medium-sized, with no tags, no identifying tape, and positioned slightly apart from the others, as if it had been placed rather than forgotten. James looked around. No one stood near it. No one seemed concerned. That in itself was cause for concern. Shadow stepped forward, slowly, the leash tugging tight as he reached the suitcase and sniffed along its bottom seam. His reaction was immediate. The low, guttural growl that vibrated from his chest sent a chill through James's spine. Shadow locked into a sit position, tail straight out behind him, chest forward, alert posture. James put himself between Maya and the luggage rack and raised a hand to Leo, who was still stationed just outside the checkpoint. The officer moved quickly. Unattended bag, James said, voice flat. Shadow's alerting. Leo's expression darkened. How long's it been here? Don't know. It wasn't here 10 minutes ago. We'll need to clear the zone. James nodded. You'll want to check it personally. He's only done this 3 times in 7 years. Leo gave a quick nod to another officer who began quietly clearing a 5-foot perimeter, redirecting a few passengers without drawing attention. Shadow remained unmoving. James approached the suitcase from the side, watching Leo as he carefully pulled the bag toward a nearby security partition. Using gloves, he unzipped the main compartment slowly. James stood behind him, Maya out of sight, his hand resting on Shadow's harness. Leo paused mid-movement and looked up. You're not gonna believe this. James stepped closer. Inside the suitcase, among what appeared to be standard clothes and toiletries, was a false bottom panel just thin enough to be missed in casual search, but obvious to a trained eye. Leo peeled it back. Nestled within like a ghost from a different life was a single brass rifle casing, .338 Lapua, the kind used for high-powered sniper rifles. James exhaled slowly. "That's military grade." "Yeah," Leo muttered, "and it's fired, not clean." "Why leave a spent round?" message James said immediately. "Or breadcrumb? You think this was left for you? No, not for me, for whoever's watching me." Leo looked over toward the gate, "And we both know who that is." James glanced over. Eric was gone. His pulse ticked up. Then a voice came over the intercom. "Passenger Eric Decker, please report to the boarding desk. Your personal item has been located." James turned sharply. What Leo's face darkened. "You've got to be kidding me." They moved fast. James motioned for Maya to stay seated, gave Shadow the command to guard, and stepped with Leo to the counter where a young airline employee stood holding a clipboard and the black suitcase. The same black suitcase. "Sir," she said, "a passenger identified this bag as theirs. We scanned the barcode. It matches Mr. Decker's check-in ID." "Where's Mr. Decker now?" James asked. "He just called us from gate 34, she replied. "He reported it missing." He was very calm. Leo exchanged a glance with James. "Did anyone see him drop the bag?" "I'm not sure," she said. "It was just found here and scanned as standard luggage. Barcode was verified. Did it come through TSA? It must have." "I'll check logs." James leaned in. "The bag contains a shell casing." She blinked, like a bullet. "Exactly." The woman paled slightly. "Sir, I need to alert security." "You've already done that," Leo cut in firmly. "Keep this off channel, no broadcast. Just log the movement and hold it insecure." She nodded quickly and stepped away. Leo whispered, "How the hell does a bag like that get through screening?" "It doesn't," James said, "unless it wasn't meant to get on the plane at all." Leo nodded. "A drop. Or bait," James said. "He wants us rattled or diverted." They turned as Shadow let out another low bark. Eric had returned. He stood by the glass wall again, phone pressed loosely to his ear. Posture relaxed, but his eyes were locked on Maya. James didn't move. Shadow stayed by Maya's side, growling low in his throat. "You want me to stop him now?" Leo asked. James shook his head. "No, we need to know what else he's planned. That round was a message. He wants me to know he's close, that he hasn't forgotten." Leo looked at the bag again. "Or it's not about you." James stared across the terminal, his jaw clenched. "No, it's about her." He meant Maya. He knew it in his gut. Eric wasn't just sending a message, he was laying groundwork. Mapping behavior, gauging proximity. James had seen it before in surveillance ops and psychological pressure campaigns. Create discomfort, establish unpredictability, and then strike when the rhythm breaks. James breathed in slowly. "He's not improvising," he muttered. "He's playing out a schedule." Leo looked around. "So, what's the next move?" James didn't answer. "Not yet." James stood frozen for half a second, eyes locked on Eric's figure beyond the crowd. The man had returned again, somehow slipping through the controlled chaos of the concourse without being intercepted or even noticed. That was the part that disturbed James most, how invisible Eric could make himself when he wanted to. The crowd at Gate 32 was thickening as passengers began hovering in anticipation of boarding, yet Eric moved through them with ease, almost like vapor. Shadow's growl began low, a vibration that barely registered through the floor, but James heard it like thunder. He turned sharply just in time to see Shadow shift his weight forward, muscles, taut teeth slightly exposed, as he stood squarely in front of Maya, blocking her line of sight. The shepherd's head lowered, his amber eyes narrowed, and his tail went stiff as a rod. Maya froze, looking confused, then scared, clutching her backpack tighter. "Shadow," she whispered. James stepped quickly between them, following Shadow's gaze. Eric was walking straight toward them now. No more pretending to check the terminal map, no more playing the passive observer. He walked with confidence, a casual stride that was just slow enough to avoid suspicion, but deliberate enough to send a message. His hands were at his sides. No coffee cup this time, no distractions. His eyes were locked on James. James raised one hand in a subtle gesture toward Leo, who was standing near a side pillar pretending to monitor the queue. Leo saw it and straightened slightly but didn't move. This wasn't a time for visible reaction. They had already determined that Eric was baiting them, and this approach felt like the next move in a longer play. James stepped forward, not far, just enough to widen the space between Maya and the approaching man. Shadow remained in front of her, his presence imposing but grounded, trained not to act unless ordered. Eric stopped 6 feet away. "Relax," he said smoothly, "not here to make a mess." James kept his stance firm, "Then keep walking." Eric smirked, tilting his head slightly. No pleasantries. After all this time, his voice was low, but not secretive, as if he wanted to be heard but didn't want a crowd. "Not in the mood," James said flatly. "You shouldn't be here." "I disagree," Eric replied. "In fact, I've been meaning to see you. Lot of unfinished business." James's phone buzzed, the vibration sharp against his thigh. He didn't take his eyes off Eric, but slipped the phone from his pocket and glanced down. One new message, no sender ID. Just one line. "Don't let the past repeat itself. I told you before, you were never fit to lead." His blood chilled. The Vietnamese was perfect, cold, intentional. It hit him like a whisper from the past. Only a handful of people had ever spoken to him in that tone, and only one had reason to repeat that line. Eric. James kept his hand loose but ready. "You tracking us?" he asked quietly. "Don't be paranoid," Eric replied. "But if I were, would you blame me after what happened?" James's jaw tightened. "You mean after the tribunal, after you sold out the unit?" Eric stepped closer, just an inch. Shadow let out a sharper growl, this one unmistakable in warning. "Easy pup, Eric," said, hands still visible. "Don't want to trigger your instincts." "He's not the one you should be worried about," James said. Eric chuckled. "I'm not worried, I'm focused." He looked at Maya, eyes lingering too long. "She looks like her mother." "Don't." James snapped, his voice lower now, more dangerous. Eric smiled again, but there was no warmth in it. "It's not a threat, it's a compliment." Then he reached into his jacket, slow, deliberate. James's hand went to his own pocket, immediately, fingers curling around the compact flashlight he kept out of habit. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it could buy time. Eric pulled out a small item, flat square. He held it out. "Found this," he said. "Thought you might want it back." James didn't move. Leo was edging closer now, slow blending with the crowd. James shook his head almost imperceptibly. "Not yet." Eric dropped the item at his feet. It was a flash drive. Black casing, no markings. James didn't need to pick it up to know what it likely contained. "More games?" he asked. "Not a game," Eric replied. "Call it a reminder." Then he turned and walked away. No rush, just turned like he had made his point, and the next move wasn't his. Shadow remained rigid for several seconds before James gave the release command. The dog shifted slightly, still growling under his breath. James scooped up the drive, held it in his palm for a moment, weighing it like it might burn. Then he slipped it into his pocket. Leo stepped beside him now. "You good?" James exhaled slowly. "He's escalating. You want me to pull him now?" "Not yet. He wants us to react. That's how he wins." "That message, what did it say?" James didn't answer. He just looked at Maya, who was watching him closely now, eyes narrowed with a child's sharp intuition. "Something from a long time ago," he said. "You think he's got more planned?" Leo asked. "He's not improvising," James replied. "He's working a sequence." He turned to Maya and knelt down. "You okay?" She nodded. "Is that man bad? He's confused," James said, choosing his words carefully. "He thinks he's fixing something. Is he going to hurt us? Not if we stay smart?" She looked at Shadow. "He won't let anything happen, right?" James smiled faintly. "No, he won't." He stood, checked his watch. Boarding had been called finally. Group A was beginning to form. James didn't move yet. He kept his eyes on Eric's retreating figure, now merging with the edge of the crowd near gate 34. Eric turned once, caught his gaze, and offered a small two-fingered salute. James didn't return it. He felt the weight of the flash drive in his pocket and the weight of his daughter's safety on his shoulders. The message wasn't just about the past. It was a warning. Something else was coming, and soon. As James watched Eric disappear into the blur of travelers, a part of him wanted to pursue the man then and there to confront whatever dark mechanism had been put into motion, but the weight of Maya's presence by his side forced him to anchor himself in patience. He knew better than to break formation when the stakes weren't just his own. His phone buzzed again. This time he turned away from the crowd, shielding the screen with his body as he opened a secure app he hadn't touched in over a year. The GPS interface loaded with a slow blue pulse across the map, and he tapped Maya's ID tag. Nothing. He blinked, tapped again. No signal. The pin that usually hovered steadily within 5 feet of their location was gone. No history, no trace. His breath caught for a moment, not from panic, but from calculation. "You okay, Dad?" Maya asked, watching him from her bench seat. "Just checking something," James said, keeping his voice even. He closed the app and tucked the phone back into his pocket. Then he gave a silent command with 2 fingers, and Shadow immediately rose and repositioned himself, now standing with his body between James and Maya, eyes trained outward, nose twitching for changes. James looked up and caught Leo's eye. He tilted his head slightly, and Leo got the message. They stepped a few paces away from Maya and the shepherd, blending into the corner between 2 gate signs. "I lost the GPS feed," James said quietly. "The earrings," Leo asked. "Gone cold. Signal jam maybe. Or spoofed. Either way, I don't like it." Leo glanced around. "There's more," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want to say this in front of your daughter." James nodded. "Tell me." I pulled the camera logs from the last 2 hours. The feed went black for exactly 13 minutes. Guess when James's eyes narrowed. When, from the moment you checked in to the second you entered the security zone. Whole segment was overwritten, not looped, rewritten. James clenched his jaw. That takes access, exactly. This isn't some hacker testing tools from a van outside the airport. This was done inside the control room. How many people have clearance? Too many, to be honest, but only 3 with full right access. I already checked 2 they were accounted for. The third, Leo hesitated. What he called in sick this morning, logged into the system remotely around the same time the overwrite occurred, and you didn't pull him yet. I'm not in charge of internal investigations. I flagged it, but my supervisor thinks I'm overreacting, because they don't know who Eric is. Exactly. James rubbed the back of his neck. He's using internal ops to blind us. And track you, maybe not me, maybe her. Leo glanced toward Maya. You think he's trying to take her? I think he's trying to make me choose. James's voice was heavy, his tone as close to breaking as Leo had ever heard. Whatever he's doing, it's personal. He could have hit harder already. He's dragging it out. To wear you down. To test how I'll respond. He wants to know if I've changed. Have you? Leo asked. James didn't answer. Instead, he turned back toward Maya, who was now rubbing Shadow's ears while humming softly. She was calm for now, but she was smart, and that calm wouldn't last much longer. We're being watched right now, aren't we? James asked. Leo nodded. From multiple angles. I can feel it too. Any chance Eric's working alone, less and less by the minute. The way that bag was planted, the overwritten logs, the fake boarding pass, someone else is running interference. James breathed out through his nose. I need a map of the terminal, internal access routes, maintenance tunnels, anything not visible to passengers. That's a red flag request, Leo said. I know, James replied. Flag me. I don't care, I'll take the heat if we make it out clean. Leo looked around, hesitated, then reached into his tablet and began pulling up schematics. This gets us both fired. Only if we fail. James studied the layout quickly. There were 2 known security blind spots near the C-Wing maintenance area. Enough cover for someone to swap IDs, change gear, or hand something off. How many guards stationed on this side of the terminal? James asked. 3 uniformed, 2 plain clothes. But if we've got a mole, I'm not trusting any of them. Shadow will know. Leo raised an eyebrow. You're going to have him screen agents. I'm going to have him screen everyone. James looked over at his daughter again. We're in containment now. No more movement unless we control the path. You think Eric is pushing you towards something, a checkpoint, a pressure moment. He wants me to have to make a decision I can't undo. Leo tapped the screen. There's a cleaning corridor that runs parallel to the boarding gate. Technically off-limits but unlocked for service staff. You thinking of using it as an exit strategy. If things go sideways, that's our pull-out route." Leo's voice dropped lower. "Do I need to pull Maya out now?" "No, not yet. That's what he's waiting for. If she disappears, he goes underground and we lose the trail." "You're baiting him." "No," James said. "He already knows I'm not leaving her. I just need him to show his next move, and if it's violent," James looked at him, "then we stop him before he gets the chance." Leo nodded slowly. "What do you need from me, Eyes?" "Ears, and when the moment hits, no hesitation." Leo looked at Maya. "She trusts you more than anyone, I know. Let's not give her a reason not to." James didn't respond. He looked at the flash drive still in his pocket and felt the weight of 100 unspoken things. Then he turned back to Maya, who was now watching him, not smiling this time, just waiting. She knew something was wrong. She just didn't know what. Yet. James didn't sleep on planes, and he definitely wasn't about to start now. As he sat in the terminal lounge with Shadow sprawled quietly at his feet and Maya leaning against his arm, half awake from the fatigue of uncertainty, his mind kept circling the same dead loop: why now and why here? The flash drive in his pocket felt heavier with each passing hour. It wasn't just a memory stick, it was a signal, an invitation back into something he'd buried long ago under medals, silence, and resignation letters. He waited until Maya drifted off beside him and Shadow's breathing steadied before pulling out his laptop, connecting to a private mobile hotspot he carried for emergencies. It took only minutes to navigate the back door's old clearance, still embedded in military archives even if officially inactive. He searched the name Eric David Decker. Multiple entries came up, some public, most sealed. He cracked through the firewalls, carefully remembering old strings of code like a second language. And then it was there. A discharge order, dated 11 years prior, signed by Colonel James Holloway. His breath froze. The file was clear and damning. Eric had been dishonorably discharged from the U.S. Army for trafficking restricted digital intelligence to unauthorized third parties. Financial logs indicated payouts from 2 foreign shell accounts. IP traces confirmed a leak through a compromised field comms hub in Kandahar, an incident that had indirectly led to the exposure of multiple Allied informants. 3 of them had been executed. James scrolled down, and there it was, his signature affirming the final recommendation of the military tribunal. He had signed the line that stripped Eric of rank, pension, and protection. The report included a short notation. Operator Decker presents elevated psychological risk under sustained pressure. Recommended no reinstatement under any conditions. James leaned back, exhaling through clenched teeth. At the time, it hadn't felt personal, it had been a necessity. Eric had been reckless, and worse, unapologetic. But now, in hindsight, he realized he hadn't seen the whole story. Another document loaded into the terminal, a follow-up from the Department of Homeland Security. It concerned asylum applications filed under the names Sylvia Decker and Lucas Decker, Eric's wife and son. James barely remembered the names, but as he read further, something burned behind his sternum. Their application had been tied to Eric's service record. With his dishonorable discharge, their petition was automatically voided. The file noted they had been returned to their country of origin, a Central Asian state under heavy political instability. The last notation was chilling destination country classified as high risk. Applicant may face social and political retribution. James rubbed his forehead slowly, the implications sinking in. Eric hadn't just lost his career, he'd lost his family's chance at safety and maybe their lives. And James had been the one who signed the line. He hadn't known. He hadn't seen that detail in the tribunal briefings. It had been buried in a postscript not even flagged for attention. But Eric had seen it and remembered. And now, after all this time, he wasn't just stalking James for retribution, he was playing out a slow, methodical retaliation rooted in grief. James clicked deeper into the personal logs embedded in the service files. There were traces of letters Eric had written to the review board begging for reconsideration. In one scrawled in uneven scan, the words cut like glass. "You know I made mistakes." But he knew what that signature would cost. He chose protocol over people. And now he pretends to sleep well at night. James sat frozen, hand on the laptop lid, unable to close it just yet. He stared at the screen as if it might somehow shift the meaning, rewrite the past. But the facts were there, undeniable. The weight of that decision, buried for over a decade now, sat squarely in his chest like a cold anchor. Maya stirred beside him. "Dad," she whispered groggily. "Still here," he said quickly, closing the lid and brushing her hair back. "Just couldn't sleep." She nodded and curled back into his side. Shadow, without command, adjusted his position to cover her feet, keeping one eye open. James glanced at the terminal windows where night had long since swallowed the tarmac and considered what came next. Eric wasn't improvising, and he wasn't just angry, he was working from a wound that had festered too long without resolution. The sniper casing in the suitcase hadn't been a threat. It had been a message from someone who had nothing left to lose. James looked again at his phone at the dead GPS tracker for Maya's earrings. That signal hadn't just been jammed, it had been shut down with intent. Someone somewhere wanted them off-grid just long enough for something irreversible to happen. He opened his encrypted messaging client and fired off a single line to an old contact need-eyes on Decker's family history. Confirm status of Sylvia and Lucas. Any living ties. He didn't expect a fast answer, it was classified content. But he needed to know. Because if they were alive, then Eric's motivations shifted. It wouldn't just be revenge, it would be leverage. And if they weren't, then what James was facing was something darker, something uncontainable. Shadow growled softly in his sleep, reacting to a sound James hadn't yet processed. A distant boarding announcement echoed through the concourse, muffled through fatigue and white noise. He looked at the crowd again. Eric wasn't in sight, but that meant nothing. He could be watching from any number of angles. The reset cameras, the falsified boarding past the manipulated bag, Eric was too prepared. James stood slowly adjusting Maya's blanket and glancing again toward the emergency maintenance corridor marked Authorized Personnel Only. It might become relevant very soon, because this wasn't about clearing a name anymore. It was about surviving a past that had just become present. James remained still for several minutes after reading the last declassified line about Sylvia and Lucas Decker, the soft hum of the terminal's nighttime announcements bouncing dully off the high ceilings. His contact had replied in terse code, Sylvia deceased in custody transit, Lucas's location unknown, presumed displaced. It hit him like a silent explosion. No visuals, no names, just status flags confirming what Eric must have known all these years his family lost as collateral in a decision James had signed off on. There was no repair for that. No retraction. And yet James wasn't just facing a man seeking revenge. Eric wasn't here to destroy him in secret. He was building something deliberate, a spectacle layered in control. James felt it now with certainty this wasn't going to end in gunfire. It would end in exposure. Dad Maya whispered, breaking the fog. "You okay, yeah, baby?" James said, gently placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Just thinking about something I have to fix." He stood stretched, slightly scanned the gate. The crowd was thinning now as boarding resumed in staggered waves. Security presence had quietly increased around them, Leo's doing likely, but James didn't trust anyone beyond Shadow. He leaned down to whisper in the dog's ear, giving a subtle signal track perimeter. Shadow moved immediately, head low, weaving near luggage racks and stanchions as though casually sniffing for comfort, but James knew he was drawing a radius, checking for presence. James glanced back toward the restroom corridor, then at his watch, then again at the flow of passengers. It only took 5 seconds. 5 seconds of distraction, of recalibrating direction for something to shift. He heard it in Shadow's bark, first a sharp, guttural alarm, and then in the gasp from 2 passengers near the vending machines. He turned instantly. Maya was gone. James's heart slammed into his throat. His body moved before thought kicked in, eyes sweeping the concourse. Maya, he called sharply, not loud enough to panic the crowd, but enough to send Leo bolting toward him. James's training took over. He scanned the flow of bodies, looking not for his daughter's pink jacket, but for disruption in patterns, gaps where people moved oddly or too quickly. And there it was. Near the edge of the boarding tunnel, a dark figure, slipping behind a pillar, gripping a small arm. Maya. James lunged forward, dodging through the crowd. He didn't shout again. He didn't break stride, but Shadow did. The shepherd had already locked onto her scent, and when he saw her being pulled behind the restricted line, he leaped the barrier. 2 officers called after him, but James barked, "Stand down," as he rushed past. Eric was dragging Maya, not violently but fast. One hand clamped on her wrist, the other holding a phone angled forward. Camera lens glowing. "Let me go," she cried. "Daddy." Shadow lunged, covering the gap in seconds, and latched his jaws around Eric's right forearm. The phone tumbled to the ground, clattering across the tiles. Eric twisted in pain, releasing Maya instinctively but not falling. James closed in, sliding between Maya and Eric, shielding her with his body while barking the release command. Shadow off the dog obeyed, but didn't retreat. He stood braced, teeth bared, watching Eric carefully. "You never change." Eric spat, clutching his bleeding arm. "Always issuing orders, always thinking you know best." "Let her go," was the only right order here, James said coldly. "You cross the line, this ends badly." Eric didn't reach for a weapon. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a second phone, already live, already streaming. The red light glowed. "It's not about hurting her," he said, voice rising just enough for the mic. "It's about making you own it. I want you to say it, James, right here. Right now, say what you did." James glanced at the camera, then back at Eric. "This isn't justice. It's not vengeance either," Eric shot back. "It's truth. And I've been erased long enough." James breathed through his nose. "You think broadcasting this makes it right?" "It makes it real," Eric replied. "Do you know what it's like to watch everything you love disappear because of one signature I didn't know?" James said. "You knew enough," Eric hissed. "You knew the cost and you chose command over consequence." James looked at Maya, who was clinging to Shadow's collar now, trembling but silent. He looked back at Eric and for the first time saw not a threat but a man shattered in pieces and trying to rebuild by burning the world around him. "You want me to say it?" James asked quietly. Eric nodded, phone still pointed. "Say it." James straightened. "I signed your discharge. I did it because I believed you compromised a mission that cost lives. And I didn't know that signature would void your wife's asylum. I didn't know what happened to your son. And for that, I'm sorry." Eric's jaw twitched. His arm was bleeding steadily, but he didn't react. "You think that's enough, no?" James said honestly, "but it's the truth." Eric lowered the phone. He stared at James for a long moment as if waiting for something to shift, something deeper than words. But it didn't come, only silence, and the soft sound of Maya's breathing behind him. Then, somewhere near the corner, a second phone vibrated. Leo's, a ping from surveillance. Movement near the opposite gate. Backup arriving. James saw it reflected in Eric's eyes a split second before he moved. James saw the recognition flicker in Eric's eyes the moment when the line between control and collapse fractured. Eric had always been composed, always 2 steps ahead, but now that his confession had been drawn out, now that the apology he'd demanded no longer tasted like victory, his posture broke. His body twitched slightly as his free hand moved toward his side. James didn't wait. "Leo," he barked into the comm, still open in his ear voice, sharp and precise. "Now." The movement near Gate 34 accelerated instantly. Leo broke into a sprint from the shadows, 2 plainclothes officers trailing behind. Eric backed up, but not toward escape. Instead, he pivoted slightly, as if about to raise the phone again, maybe to throw it, maybe to trigger something. James surged forward, knocking the device from his hand and shoving him back against the column with a swift shoulder press. Eric resisted, not with full force, but with a tremor of desperation that gave away the truth he hadn't wanted this to end in restraint, but he'd known it would. Leo arrived a half-second later, locking Eric's injured arm behind his back with practiced ease, while one officer secured the opposite wrist. "He's clean," the second officer confirmed, but James spoke over him. "Check his bag, front compartment. He dropped something earlier, should be a drive and a secondary device." Leo nodded and ordered a sweep, while Eric stood restrained, breathing hard, his face a study in quiet fury and exhaustion. "This was never about hurting anyone," he muttered. "You could have just said it, years ago." "You didn't want an apology," James replied quietly. "You wanted an audience. You wanted to be seen. Because I was erased." Eric snapped, the venom now softened by fatigue. "You turned me into a ghost. This was the only way to exist again." James looked at him, eyes steady. "You were a soldier once. You knew the cost of every mission. I made a call and it destroyed us both, but it's over." Eric didn't answer. He was already sagging slightly between the officers, the adrenaline draining out of him. James watched them lead him away, silent, now no longer posturing, and then turned back toward the concourse. Maya was sitting on the floor next to Shadow, arms wrapped around his thick neck, cheek pressed to his fur. She wasn't crying, she was whispering. James approached slowly, his legs feeling heavier now, every step pulling the weight of the last 12 hours. Maya looked up as he neared her, eyes glassy but composed. "You okay?" he asked, kneeling down. She nodded slowly, brushing hair from her face. "I'm not scared anymore." "You don't have to be," James said, reaching to gently stroke her head. "It's done." "I thought only you protected me," she said, voice small but sure. "But Shadow—" He didn't even wait. He just knew. Her fingers curled into the fur behind Shadow's ears. I think he remembered the promise, too. James felt a lump rise in his throat. Shadow didn't move, only blinked slowly the way he always had when something was settled in his mind. James pulled both of them close, pressing his forehead to Maya's. He never forgot, James whispered. "Neither did I." Around them, the terminal began to return to its normal rhythm. Passengers unaware of how close the morning had come to tragedy, or perhaps unwilling to look too long at anything not labeled on their boarding passes. Leo returned with confirmation Eric's bag contained the missing drive-printed images from surveillance scrubs, a tampered boarding pass printer module, and 2 forged IDs, one of which had been partially burned. It was enough to hold him indefinitely. "He'll be processed," Leo said quietly. "He won't walk again, not after this." James nodded, grateful but subdued. There was no triumph in justice when the cost had already been paid years ago in silence and distance. He looked once more at his daughter, whose hand still rested on the thick fur of a dog that had crossed continents missions and near retirement just to fulfill an old instinct, protect the ones that matter. As the boarding gate finally reopened, James lifted Maya into his arms, Shadow walking at his heel with unshaken precision. They passed through the threshold together, not chased, not running, just moving forward, step by steady step. Behind them, the cameras rebooted the intercom, cycled to its next routine announcement, and the red recording light on the confiscated phone blinked off for good. Shadow gave one final glance back as if to mark the end, then pressed closer to Maya's side. She whispered to him one more time, her voice barely audible to anyone but him. "You kept your promise, old friend." And in the softest twitch of his ears and the stillness of that loyal frame, Shadow answered without a sound. If the story moved, you don't forget to like and subscribe to support more heartfelt storytelling like this. I'm curious what part of the story struck you the most, and where are you watching from? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one.